Welcome back, folks, for a new episode of Leaked. It's been a long time. So today we'll start off talking about the Japanese heavy tanks that's likely coming soon toward the tanks. Now, it's not for certain that these monstrosity will arrive in patch 9.10, but based on previous examples, such as the Chinryukai was released a patch before the STB-1, and the AMX-80C was released a patch before the AMX-30B, it's highly likely, like 85% chance, we're going to see these monstrosities because we just got the Japanese Tiger 1 at tier 6. So I can't wait. Now the main problem with the Japanese heavy tanks is that they're very big and most of these tanks are paper tanks. So there were blueprints about these tanks, but it's highly classified by the Japanese government. So evidence of these tanks' existence are limited, so it's hard to find good details about these tanks. But in the low tiers with the Type 89, the Type 91, and the Type 95, these tanks were built, like 1, 2, or 4 of them, but they were not mass produced. And starting at tier 5 with the Mitos, moving on to the OIs, and the Type 2604 and 2605, these tanks' existence was not that well documented, so it's hard to find good evidence and the dimensions about these tanks other than a few classified Japanese materials and museum scraps, so that kind of sucks. But I think it's better to have these monstrosity even though they are like paper tanks because it adds variety to the game. So it's like having a free TOG or purchasable TOG at every tier, starting at tier 5 to tier 10. So I kind of like it. Now the main issue that the Japanese heavy tanks didn't survive the test of time is because, well, the suspension was too stressed out based on the weight of the material on the tank, and the tank was no less than 100 tons, so the suspension had to work it. And yeah, they were scrapped for resources, so they were recycled, and documents were the only surviving evidence about these tanks. So it's not like the E100, where the British salvaged the chassis from the Germans, and the Mouse, which the Russians took the turret from one prototype and the hull armor from another prototype and made it together in Kubinka. So it's not like that. So the Japanese heavy tanks were actually recycled in materials, and that kind of sucks. So documentations about these tanks were limited, and it's hard to find good materials. So don't go judging me if I make a mistake, alright? But yeah, they were pretty big. So today we'll start off talking about the Mitos, and I'll put leak videos about these tanks in groupings because it will take forever if I do a single video about each and every one of these tanks. So I'll do a video about the Mitos, I'll do a video about the OIs, I'll do a video about the Type 2604 and 2605, and the last video will be about the lower tier, the Type 89, the Type 91, and the Type 95. So that's how it goes, I guess. And here's a quick history about the Japanese heavy tank designs. So in 1939, after encountering and losing to the Soviets, the Japanese and Colonel Iwakuro decide that they need a 100-ton heavy tank to be like a mobile pillbox against the Soviets or the Chinese in Manchuria. So they came up with two designs. The first one is a Type 96 Iwakuro. The second one is the Mito 100. It turns out both tank ideas were scrapped in favor of the Mito 150. The Mito 150 is a heavier version of the Mito 100, has more armor and a bigger gun, so they liked it and built one prototype of the Mito 150 and put it to test. It turns out the suspension was overstressed based on the weight, so the whole mobility of the tank suffered and was really bad. So the whole idea for the initial Japanese heavy tank was a failure, and the idea was scrapped. The Mito 150 was recycled for materials, so the only surviving evidence is the single track link and the documentation on display in Wakajishi Shrine Museum. Now in 1944, after looking at the Mouse designed by the Germans, it kind of re-spirited or rekindled their ideas for a heavy tank. So they took the Iwakuro and designed the IO from it, the 100-ton IO right here. So this hull armor looks almost the same as the Iwakuro, but it has less pair of road wheel and a bigger gun. So this thing has 8 pairs of road wheel, has more armor, 150mm gun instead of 105. So here is the IO 100. They also built the Type 2604 based on the Iwakuro, and the OI. The hull armor is based off these two tanks with one more road wheel and a bigger turret with less or no mini turrets on it. It turns out the hull armor was not designed, but the turret was. So the Russians took a picture after they saw it right here. And the whole ideas for the Japanese heavy tanks were pretty much a failure, so everything is in blueprints. And the only tank that was truly designed, as they proclaimed, is the Mito 150. So that kind of sucked. But yeah, most of these documentations and information are scattered. And it's hard to find all the information. So there were a lot of confusion between what's called the Mito 150 or what's called the Mito 100 as opposed to the Iwakuro. So there were confusion back and forth. And yeah, history is hard to dig up because everything is classified, everything is deleted or stuff, but that's a general overview about the Japanese heavy tanks. And today we have the Mitos, the Mitsubishi-Tokyos, with the 100-ton version at tier 5 and the 150-ton version at tier 6. Now both vehicles share similar hull and turret designs, so they look like a gigantic T-shaped Tetris block of a tank, but the Mito 150 is slightly bigger with a longer barrel gun, more armor plating, and weighs 50 tons more. So that's the main difference. Now here is the Mito 100, and when compared with the T1 Heavy, the same tier tank, the Mito 100 is almost twice in width, taller too. So I call the T1 Heavy the loaf of bread. The Mito 100 looks like a cake. That's a bad analogy. Yeah, it's longer too, so this tank is huge. Now mind you, this is a tier 5 heavy tank. It could see down to tier 3s with the likes of AMX 38s, Panzer 1Cs, Panzer 2s, Panzer 4As. Oh god, this thing is massive. You could fit like 8 Panzer 1Cs into this thing. If this is a hot dog pack, then the Panzer 1Cs will be hot dogs. Okay, that's a terrible analogy. Okay. But this is a very big tank, and it could squash a lot of low tiers. So don't go ramming into this thing. Whatever you do, just don't do it. Avoid the urge to ram Japanese heavy tank. So here are the collision models, as well as the earlier models of the Mito 100. As you can see, the best armor plating on the Mito 100 is 75mm. Now the side armor is almost the same as the frontal plate, so you could bounce a few shots while side scraping, and the best course to angle this tank is almost 45 degrees because the side armor is almost the same as the frontal plate. So 45 degrees will maximize your side and frontal plating efficiency. Now the upper glacis is well sloped, same goes for the lower glacis, but the middle plate is not that well sloped, so it's like a Tiger 1 tank, and it has mini turrets at the front as well as at the back, so you could bounce a few shots from the roundedness of the mini turrets, but don't depend on it. You do have side skirts to cover up the tracks, and the turret is not that well armored. It has a mantlet, but the mantlet is not that big, and the sides and cheeks of the turret is flat with only 75mm, so it gets easily penetrated. So this thing looks like doesn't have a good armor protection, but it's still decent against like low tiers, like tier 4s and tier 3s. It does not stand a chance against like tier 6 and above. So yeah, don't go too deep, too ballsy with this thing. Now here are the main stats for the Mito 100. It's a tier 5 heavy tank. It has 700 hit points, which is above average, but not crazily above average like 800 or 900. Engine power is 1200 horsepower, which is quite good, weighs 100 tons. So the power to weight ratio is 12 horsepower per ton ratio. What? That's borderline medium tanks. That's quite good. Top speed is 40 kilometers per hour, which is quite fast for a heavy tank, and with that horsepower per ton ratio, it could reach it. So go ramming with this thing. Hull traverse is 24 degrees per second. Turret traverse is 27 degrees per second. Average, alright. Terrain resistance is 0.959 for hard, 1.055 for medium, and 1.7 for soft. Quite good, average-ish, goodish, decent. View range is 360 meters, good. Radio range is 440, average for a tier 5, so good enough. Hull armor is 75 at the front, 70 at the sides and rear. Turret armor is 75 all the way around. So armor protection is good against lower tiers if you angle it. And this thing is gigantic, so don't fear to ram stuff. Gun is a 120mm gun, short barrel. Has 130mm of penetration with 300 damage per shot. Reloads every 9 seconds with a gun rammer. DPM is 1900 or so. 2100 with a gun rammer. So quite goodish. Accuracy is not the best, 0.39. Aim time is quite long, 2.5 seconds. But you do have a very good gun depression of 10 degrees and elevation of 20 degrees. So it's not that bad. I mean, it could stand up to tier 6, but I doubt tier 7s. You could penetrate Tiger 1s, but for the likes of T-29s, nope. Yeah, Porsche Tigers, nope. Doesn't do it. I don't even think you can penetrate the AMX. What's that thing called? I totally forgot what the AMX heavy tank called. Oh well. So this thing is alright for a tier 5 heavy, but if it's top tier, it does smash a lot of faces because the armor is actually decent against lower tiers, and it's a very big vehicle, so you can go smash like stewards and other stuff. So we can see the average for a tier 5 heavy tank. The penetration is 130, which is above average, so that's quite good. Rate of fire is below average, but the DPM is roughly the same, quite above average by 200, so that's nice. Accuracy is not the best, but it's on average for tier 5 heavy. Okay. Aim time is also quite long, but not as long as a KV1, so decent enough. You do have a lot of gun depression, so that's quite good. And let's take a look at the mobility of this vehicle. So it has average horsepower per ton ratio. That's quite nice based on the weight of this thing. And top speed is very fast for a heavy tank, 40 kilometers per hour. Reverse is quite good. And terrain resistance is above average. Way above average too. I'm surprised this thing has above average terrain resistance with average mobility, and yet it weighs 100 tons. The KV1 weighs only 50 tons. You could face tier 3s with this thing, and you just ram kill everybody. And let's quickly compare the mobility of a Mito 100 with a KV5. Now, horsepower per ton ratio is almost the same between these two tanks. The Mito has better hull traverse, the same top speed, way better terrain resistance for the Mito, and weighs almost the same as a KV5. Now the frontal plate is not as well armored as a KV5, but this thing is basically a KV5 at tier 5. That's going against like Stewarts and Matildas and AMX 40s. This thing is hilarious. It could ram kill anything a tier 5 or below. Even tier 6 or even tier 7. Holy crap. But the armor plating is not as strong, so it factors into the ram damage. But you could just play this thing for the fun of it and just go ram all the time. and equipped like direct impact or controlled impact, whatever it's called. But yeah, shaping up to be pretty good, surprisingly fast for a gigantic monstrosity. So that's the Mito 100. And here is the Mito 150 at tier 6. Now it is slightly bigger, with longer gun barrel, thicker armor plates, and better armaments for the mini turrets than the Mito 100. So this thing has cannon boobs for mini turrets than the machine gun boobs. It's like we want to kill stuff too. But it is bigger than the Mito 100, and don't even go ramming into any Japanese heavy tanks starting at tier 5. It's a very big vehicle. It has a license plate at the back. Neat. But here is the main comparison between the Mitos. As you can see, the 100-ton version looks a lot like a TOG, a bigger TOG, whereas the 150 version looks roughly the same size as a mouse. Just don't go ramming them. It's a bad idea. Here's with the box tank, the SU-100Y. It looks smaller than the gigantic castle next to it. Yeah, it's a very big behemoth. Don't ram any Japanese tanks other than mediums above tier 5. That's a good rule to learn. And here are the collision models, as well as the non-texture models for the Mito 150. As you can see, the best armor on the 150 Mito is the frontal plates. It's 150mm as opposed to 75mm on the Mito 100. Now the side armor did not get buff, so it's the same as the Mito 100, 75mm. So angling of this vehicle is not as drastic as the Mito 100, at about 20 to 30 degrees would be good, but over angling will expose the side armor, so don't expose the 75mm. Angle the frontal plate about 20 degrees, and the frontal plate should act about 200mm of protection, and that's very good. The upper glacis as well as the lower glacis are well sloped, and they're 150mm, so most guns up to tier 8 will not penetrate this upper plate, so no worries. But the middle plate for the hull, as well as the mini turrets, are not well sloped, and they do need a high penetrating gun. I say most tier 7 guns will have a hard time penetrating the frontal middle plates of the Mito 150, but tier 8s shouldn't struggle that much. This tank is very good if it's top tier, because 150mm at tier 6 is like ridiculously good. The turret is the same, 150mm all the way around, with a very good, I say rectangular gun mantlet. It's mostly the gun, so this will block a few shots. But I think you get your gun knocked out if you get hit right here. So this is not actually a mantlet, quote unquote, but it is 150mm and sloped backwards at 45 degrees or so. This will bounce a lot of shots. So the main trade-off between the Mito 150 and the 100 version is that this tank, even though it has the same engine, is slower on the weight, but it has more armor even at the rear end. As you can see here, it is 150mm at the ass, which means that even though if you get flanked, they probably will have a hard time penetrating your rear. That's insane. And here are the main stats for the Mito 150. It's a tier 6 heavy tank. It has 970 health, which is above average, but not crazily above average like the TOG 2, which has 1400 health. Engine power is the same as the Mito 100, 1200 horsepower. The weight is increased by 50 tons, so the power to weight ratio is reduced by 50%. Well, not 50%, like 33%, but 8 horsepower per ton ratio is not that bad, so still quite good for such a heavy tank. Now, it's not as good as a mouse or a E100's level of horsepower per ton ratio, but it's not as bad as a T95, so this will feel sluggish, but you have the armor to back it up, so no worries. Top speed is about 30 kilometers per hour. Hull traverse is 26 degrees per second. Turret traverse is 25 degrees per second. Terrain resistance is above average, 0.95 for hard, 1.15 for medium, and 1.5 for soft. Pretty good terrain resistance. View range is adequate, 370 meters. That's like a Hellcat at tier 6. That's quite good actually. Radio range is standard, 440. It's okay, it's not that bad, but not that good. Hull armor is 150 at the front, 70 at the sides, and 150-ish at the rear. Turret armor is 150 all the way around. This thing is well armored, other than the side of the hull. The gun is 100mm, has better penetration because of the longer gun barrel, so 175mm of penetration, 300 damage per shot, fires about 6 rounds per minute. DPM is not that good, about 1800, so it could go up to a 2000-ish DPM with a gun rammer. Reloads every 10 seconds. Accuracy is not the best, 0.41. Aim time is 2.97 seconds. That's almost 3 seconds. The gun is not that good, but there is gun depression to help you with gun elevation of 20 degrees. And gun depression is 10 degrees, which is fairly decent, so it can overmatch the roof armor of most tanks, but 175mm of penetration for a heavy tank at tier 6 is way above good. It's pretty goddamn awesome. This thing has a lot of armor, slow to move, and a lot of penetration, but the DPM is not that high, so it's like a mouse at tier 6. The armor reminds me of the Ferdinand and the Porsche Tiger at tier 7. The Ferdinand's at tier 8, obviously, but yeah, very thick frontal armor, very thick. 150 at tier 6? You nuts? This thing won't get penetrated by anything under tier 7. That's insane. And if you angle it, that increase up to 200mm effective. Crazy good. So let's compare the mobility with the average tier 6 heavy tank. So average tier 6 heavy has about 12 horsepower per ton ratio. So this has only 8. Feels a lot sluggish in comparison. Hull traverse is above average at 26 degrees per second. So that's good. Top speed is below average by 5 kilometers per hour. Okay, not that rough. Terrain resistance is above average, all above average, so this thing has actually great terrain resistance in comparison to regular tier 6 heavies. That's very good. And the health is above average by 26. It's not amazing like the TOG, but the TOG is special, I guess. The view range is above average by 20 meters. So this thing could spot for itself, but I bet the camouflage rating is crap, like super crap. The radio range is below average by 100 meters, but this thing is a frontline tank, so it is in the heat of action, whereas other tanks are hiding behind that need the radio. And this tank weighs 100 tons more than the average. Holy crap. Now, gun-wise, it has better penetration than average by 15 millimeters, so that's good. Damage is above average, that's great. DPM is on average the same on average, so that's interesting. Nice to know. Yeah, it's not that suffering. Okay. Aim time is above average by 0.02. I'm sorry, not the aim time. Aim time is way above average by 0.3 seconds. Accuracy is above average by 0.02. So this thing is not that accurate with that big cannon, but it does a lot of damage per shot, like a T-150. Okay, fair. Has very good gun depression to overmatch the roof, even though it doesn't need it, and gun elevation is above average. So the Mito 150 looks like a giant bunker of a tank. It has a lot of armor, 150 millimeters, with a slight sloping about 20 degrees or even 15. The frontal upper plate could go up to 170-ish, 180-ish millimeters, and it's quite good and effective at low tiers, even against like tier 7s. So let's take a look at the Ferdinand as well as the Porsche Tiger, because with just slight sloping of the frontal plate, they can bounce a lot of shots. And it does not have the weak, like side cheeks on the frontal hull, whereas on the Porsche Tiger and the Ferdinand, they have this weak plate next to the tremendous frontal upper plate of the Porsche Tiger, so it does not have the weakness on the cheeks. But give it a slight sloping of the frontal plate, and you can see it can go up to almost 230 millimeters as opposed to the 200. So this frontal plate, if you angle it like this, could go up to say 170-ish, 180-ish. So this thing could withstand tier 6, tier 7, and sometimes tier 8 guns. Yeah, this thing is a bunker. It's not the same as the Mito 100, where the Mito 100 is more mobile. Not that well armored per se, but it could ram stuff, whereas this thing could not ram stuff based on the power to weight ratio, but it has a lot of armor to compensate and does do a lot of damage based on the penetration and alpha of the gun. Accuracy is not that bad. It's alright. So it's not the derpy accuracy of a KV2, but don't expect to snipe with it. But this is a frontline heavy bunker, movable bunker of a tank. And there you go, folks, the Mitos of tier 5 and tier 6 of the Japanese heavy tank line branch that's likely coming in the 9.10 patch for the tanks. Now these tanks are shaping up to be like mobile castles or land battleships in the battlefield against a bunch of shrimps like the M4 Sherman, T-34s, the KV-1s, the Matildas, the Stuarts. Shrimps, small insignificant tanks in comparison to the mighty Imperial Army. But don't go ramming into these tanks, and don't get too salty if you get rammed by one of them. So these are very, very big forces to be reckoned with. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll cover the OI and the Type 2604, 2605, as well as the lower tiers with new videos about them. But today's video is about the Mito, and yeah, I'll probably enjoy these tanks when they come out. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys next time. Peace. 僕らはあの影